Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Taylor, and welcome to the Storyteller Studio, Episode 2. I didn't fix the title in my stream because I'm the best. Anyway, while I do that, we're going to go around the circle, and we are going to introduce ourselves. So, I'm going to go counterclockwise. That takes us to Shawnee B.
Oh, hello. I'm Shauntelle B. You can find me at Shauntelle B on Twitter. I'm here and I'm ready to talk because it's fun.
All right, next up is Matt.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. You can find me at orcish1 underscore 83 on Twitter for the first time ever because I just changed it. Happy to be here.
And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and you can find me here on Do Respite, which I always want to say Do Respite because that's how my brain says it.
Yeah, I've been told that, but it's not. It's do respite or do respite, however you want to say it. That's fine. Okay, so this evening, our topic for the night is barriers to entry, and as always, in our whole one episode previous to this, we're gonna focus on telling our own stories and providing kind of our own personal anecdotes about it. As we did last week, and as we will from henceforth, I'll ask some questions and we'll chat. We're still having a few technical issues where talking over each other is not something that comes across very well quality wise, so we won't do that as best we can. But let's start with our newest gamer, I think, and that's Matt. So when it comes to game, talk to me about your barriers to entry. What does that mean to you? I have certain ideas. I know, having talked with Shawnee this week, Shawnee has certain ideas. What are your thoughts on barrier to entry, and what are stories you have with regards to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I really appreciate this week's topic because it is a little bit fresh for me, having started in the hobby a couple of years ago. And I mean, barriers to entry to be an active participating member of a tabletop role playing group. You've got to have a rule book, you've got to have dice, maybe you've got to have minis. And for me, once I knew where to get those things or the good place to get those things, it was fairly easy. But one of my own personal barriers to entry was admitting that I didn't know any of that stuff. Like I didn't know what I needed to ask, where to get, or things like that. So acknowledging to my more seasoned cohorts, right, that I was brand new, I didn't even know what to ask for, was helpful. Another barrier to entry for me was whether there would be someone to GM. And so knowing that you've got somebody, you've got a group that can um, do it all like consistently was an important thing for me.
Okay. I know, playing with Matt takes those things very seriously, and we'll get into kind of an equipment episode on a different date. But I remember we were doing a one shot one night because we couldn't get our entire group together, and we decided we were playing 4th edition D&D, and I get a call from Matt about 45 minutes before session. And Matt's like, it seems like in order to play 4th edition, I've got to have a player's handbook. So I had to find one. I'm on my way to this game store, but it's this far away. I might be late to session. And I was like, no, Matt. Like, I've got all of that. Plus, it's a one shot. Bring it back. Just come to game. We'll be good. But so that, yeah, that's a thing that happened. And Matt's really good at asking those questions. He didn't used to be. He didn't start there, but he did get a lot better about asking those kind of questions. And I think there's also another barrier to entry that you have experienced a lot more than I think most do, and I'd like to ask you about it before we move on. Is you have massive scheduling conflicts on a regular basis. You are the second most schedule conflicted person that I've ever gamed. That's not true, because Escomat exists. I forgot that Escomat exists. Not really. I totally remember that you exist, Escomat. But, you know, you and Ben with that local group had some pretty serious scheduling conflicts on a regular basis. So talk to me about that for a minute.
Yeah, in our last session, I talked about, I described myself as a working stiff, right? I work more than 40 hours a week. I'm a modern family man, so I do a good bit of stuff around the house and with kids, including taking my son to his weekly tabletop gaming group and things like that. So um, it, it was meaningful to me to be able to have a couple of circles of friends uh, to kind of work with and see which group I would fit best with. There was a period of time when I was doing an online version of a tabletop role playing group and then a local in person. And I had to choose between one or the other because of some scheduling conflicts. For me, it's about communication. It's about a little bit of sacrifice because, and Erik, you and I have talked a little bit about this, and it's kind of one of the points of inspiration for Do Respite Media is it is a respite from the grind of your daily life. It is an opportunity to recharge batteries. And so if there is a bit of sacrifice, for example, saying, hey, wife of mine, I love you. We're going to have to do our dates on a specific night of the week because the other night of that weekend is game night. That discipline is worth it because it allows for me to recharge those batteries.
And I'll take the moment to publicly acknowledge that your wife has been super awesome. I remember when we started, and I invited you guys. I did. I invited both of you, and your wife declined adamantly. But they were like, "Yeah, he needs a guy night. Go." They did not understand that I was bringing you into a lifelong hobby that I intended to not let you out of. So I would like to publicly acknowledge Jess for that and say thank you for letting you kind of stick it out. We're going to jump over to Sarah, who I'm Sarah's primary GM, only GM, I think. Same with Matt. I'm Matt's primary and only GM. And something that came up in feedback internally actually was asking questions to the people I GM for before I say my piece, because I get to interact with them and say the things that I think about what they've had to say. Excuse me. So, what about you, Sarah? Barriers to entry when it comes to game. What were yours? What are yours? What still plagues you now?
Oh, well, since you put it that way, what plagues me? Hate to say it, but my kids plague me because, well, since both my husband and I both play, which is awesome, getting to have a hobby that both your spouse and you enjoy. But at the same time, that means that there's no one to watch the kids. And while I'm kind of lucky and unlucky in that we're an hour behind you time zone wise, so that means for us, we start playing at 10. That doesn't usually conflict with anything else that we had planned during the day. We don't usually plan to do things that late at night. And for the most part, my three older kids are in bed. My oldest sometimes has a hard time sleeping, so he'll pop out in the middle of games sometimes and need reassurance. But for my 3-year-old, well, she's 3 now. When we started playing, I was trying to think. I don't know if she was like 6 months or 10 months old. So that meant that she wasn't really on a very good set schedule. So there was trying to get her to sleep, and there was even breastfeeding her in the middle of games. I would just go off screen for a while and you would hear my voice while we were playing. So my kids can sometimes be, they can make gaming hard, especially if everybody else in the game is getting frustrated with the fact that they keep interrupting, or you'll see Faye jumping on the couch over here while we're playing and everybody's like, she's gonna fall. No, it's okay. No, she's gonna. Okay, no, it's okay. So my kids can be very distracting while we're trying to play.
And we've been there for the. I mean, if you watch Stars That Bind on Saturdays, which you should, come watch Stars That Bind. We'll be there, episode 2 this weekend. We were there for the possible fake concussion bleeding after falling thing, where we just switched off which parent was not here at the moment, because you and Jeff got to move in and out to handle Faye. I've had a number of times, especially very early, while I was still getting to know you. I think, to be perfectly honest, I think that one of the barriers to entry had been for a long time that you and I had never met, and you and I had only interacted very specifically about game. We didn't interact outside of that. Your husband and I, we'd play World of Warcraft together, we'd play other games together, so we had this rapport and this friendship, but you and I only interacted over game, and always sort of through this window of Jeff. And so I will remember very vividly the very first time that I saw Faye do the swan dive off of the couch onto the other section of onto the other section of the couch, where she just climbed up onto the back, and Sarah's totally in character and role playing, and then I get this expression, and everybody else on stream that isn't Sarah gets that expression just behind you. Just see Faye just jump and leap of faith off of the couch and face plant down into the other part. And so I will vividly remember those, and definitely can remember times where, somebody comes in and out. I will say that you guys have done a remarkable job of never actually letting it stop you. There's never been a time where both of you are gone. There's never been a time where either of you have had to be gone for an exceptionally long time. You guys have tried to get me to switch game night any number of times so that you can ship your kids off to your folks. But I've always been impressed with the way you guys specifically handle your barrier to entry. So let's jump to Shawnee. She's Shauntelle B. Yes, I got a text message from my wife being like, why are you calling her Shawnee? It's because we're friends and I call her Shawnee. That's how it is. Jump to Shauntelle. You, I think, have distinctly different barriers to entry than the rest of us, but at the same time somehow play more than the rest of us. So let's talk about that, but also the juxtaposition between those two things. But
Yeah.
at least before I started Do Respite, you played more than I do. So talk to me about your story of barriers to entry, because it's definitely a unique thing in comparison to the rest of us.
I mean, I think I still play more games than you do. Actively. Yeah. So just going to put that out there. Barriers to entry for me, when I first started playing, came in the form of not seeing anyone play the game who looks like me, not having people in the source books that looks like me, not like it's very much a social barrier to entry. It's along the same lines, and I was joking with Erik about this earlier, of it taking a fair amount of my life before I saw anyone of color that had a cat. Like it's it's that kind of odd thing of, I want to do this thing, but I don't know if socially this is something that someone that looks like me would, could, or should be doing. And then when someone said, well, come do the thing because it's fun, I was like, oh, okay, well, then I'll do it. And then once I was in, I couldn't be stopped. And so that's kind of what's happened.
Still can't be stopped. Yeah, I put up casting calls on Do Respite to be like, hey, I'm going to play these games. This is the content hours I need to fill. And Chantel's always like, I need to find a way in my schedule to do this. And I look at her game list and go, I mean, yes, you can, but that's a lot of games. Admittedly, I think I come from it from the GM perspective. If I had to GM 7 games, I think I'd just die. But
it's just 7 different people in my head. It's fine.
Yeah, because that's healthy.
Oh. You know, the funny thing about that is that I didn't think about my actual personality.
Yeah, I noticed. So talk to me a little bit more about that, because I'm a white guy with glasses, right? And I've been bald a long time. So quintessentially, I fit the stereotype more than most people at the table, I think. You know, I was an athlete, and so for a long time that broke the stereotype. I'm no Joe Manganiello, but, you know, I was athletic. Talk to me about that idea, because gatekeeping comes up, and we'll do a gatekeeping episode where we'll bring in a bunch of other people who experience gatekeeping in a way that I can't even fathom, and I'll probably just sit back and listen. But I don't have the experience. If I show up at a game store and want to play, and if I put myself out there, 9 times out of 10 I get to play. And the only reason I don't is generally the game's full. So Sarah, I know, comes at it from the approach of being a woman, but you come at it from the approach of, I will let you fill in how to say this so I don't accidentally offend anybody. Because
I'm a black woman.
You are a black woman.
I'm a black woman. That's how I define me. That's what I go with.
So how have you two, Sarah and Shauntelle, dealt with those things? I mean, Sarah, for you, I know most of your gaming has been with us, but when you went to Gen Con, did you ever feel like there was this barrier because you were a woman, or because you were at Gen Con, did you feel like that barrier was broken down a little bit?
I mean, I noticed that there were more males than females. Oh, speaking of,
So while we deal with Faye, talk to us, Shani, about your version of that exact same question. I know you haven't been to a lot of gaming cons, but, you know,
No.
getting into games and stuff like that as a black woman, how has that impacted things that you've done?
There's a few things that can kind of come up, especially in this space of, especially in the space of being a performer and playing games on stream, is that, I mean, I'm just going to say tokenism can become a thing. I don't feel that way. I choose my games and I choose who I'm playing with, and it's just about what comes up. But at the same time, there's the acknowledgement and awareness that, you know, of who I'm playing with and the cultural implications of what they can bring to a table, because the more diversity there is, the more, like, when I play with people that come from more diverse backgrounds, I tend to find myself asking questions that I wouldn't have asked. And from my perspective, playing TTRPGs, what I enjoy about them is the way that we can simulate the real life, the real world, and carry those over and see how things that we would play out in the real world would be different in this essentially fantasy, regardless of genre, world that we are playing in. So in terms of barriers, often it's a case of, how are people going to perceive gender in this case? And are they going to start out with gender and race as a baseline difference, or are they going to sort of come in it from a neutral perspective and just see what happens? There are times when I have felt kept out of games, or times when I felt that I've been overly encouraged to play games because of my gender or my race. but at the same time, it's that sense of, well, this is kind of just what it is.
And it's for me, speaking as someone who gets the opportunity to play as a player with you, and who is going to have the opportunity to GM for you at least once in a week, if not twice. I look at my tabletop groups, and my primary online group now has more than I think most people would call your standard number of women in a group, right? I talk to so many people who are like, I have one woman in my group, and I've never experienced that very often. I guess not never, but very rarely is there just one. I was like, Sarah was for a while, now that I think about it. But I don't know. It's been unique because when I think of our local group, the group that Matt and I played with, we had women at the table. We had people of mixed racial background. We had, then we had our nerdy white guys at the table. And it wasn't ever something that necessarily I thought about. And so when I hear people talk about it, it makes me very cognizant of a barrier that I don't see, right? A barrier that I'm quite literally blind to, that I feel bad. We had a conversation today, Shauntelle, about tokenism and how right now in our shows, you're the only person of color who participates in Do Respite shows. It's not going to stay that way, but you are. We have a lot of women and we have a lot of non-binary individuals who play with us, but we don't have any people of color other than you. And you mentioned this thing that at the time, and we talked about it, made me feel bad because I was like, oh, well, I don't think of you as our token black person, right? You're not our, you're just not. That's not how it is. I play games to play with my friends, and you and I are friends, and so we play games together. Sarah and I are friends, so we play games together. I don't sit and look and be like, Sarah is the woman in my group, right? Sarah's Sarah, and we're friends. And so I play with my friends. So talk to me about that barrier, the two of you, since we've got Sarah back now. Talk to me about being... Does it bother you when people look at you and just like, oh, that's just my friend, but we don't recognize that, necessarily... Do you get treated differently? I guess, and in that same token, have I ever treated you differently in a game we've played because of those things? Just as a self-introspection kind of thing. Or in your case, Sarah, I mean, what are ways at Gen Con, since that's the place where you've played with people who aren't us, where you interacted with differently by being the way you are, and how did that impact your enjoyment or your desire to be there?
I don't think I was. I don't think I've ever experienced discrimination just because I'm a woman in this game. Of course, that's because I usually play with you guys, and you guys don't play like that. But even at Gen Con, I didn't feel like anybody didn't want me to be there, didn't want me playing. I'm not sure anyone would have been brave enough to express that with my 6'2" husband next to me and you and Matt, like with me rolling along with the group that I was with. But
it would have gone very, very poorly for them.
Yeah. So in my case, I've only been playing almost 3 years, and I haven't been brave enough to try to go into a game store yet and play a game there. So
Could I ask whether, by that same token, as it were, whether people were overly eager to have you play? In comparison to the others that were with you, did more people want you to play with them than others?
I can't say that they were. The games that we played, we had already signed up for ahead of time, and we didn't try to get into any games where we were just showing up right on the spot and trying to get into a game that had an opening. So far that hasn't been my experience.
This will be a topic that'll be interesting to revisit as we do more conventions and stuff like that over time, to see how that shifts. Because I do think as we start doing more, obviously we'll branch out and go to different things, which we didn't do a lot of this time around. But what about you, Shawnee? A lot of your you've done a lot more streams than anybody else has. And you've mentioned, like, and, you know, don't call anybody out or whatever unless you are feeling vitriolic. Don't be vitriolic. But, like, you mentioned that you've had people feel that way, feel ogre eager to have you play. Like, tell me about that. Because I know that, you know, there are women who watch the show who maybe think about playing. I have concerns because my daughter is very imaginative and has that storytelling bent. And I do have concerns about my daughter getting to play in things with people who aren't me. What about... I think you get my question, since I don't get my question, so hopefully you do.
Is your question about safety and barriers to entry?
Yes, sure. We'll go with that. If
Is
you
that-
have
is that
if you
the
have a
question?
good story for that, then we'll call that the question.
Oh no, I don't know that I do. I've generally been actually incredibly lucky with the games that have come my way and the people that have wanted to play. Because most of my games are with people that either I know in real life or they're with people that I've had time to get to know. And by get to know, I mean on Twitter, because of course that's how you get to know people, is through social media these days. But one thing that I do spend a lot of time doing on Twitter is actually curating my feed. I don't just talk to everyone. Just um, I don't just communicate with anyone, and I don't take vitriol. I won't. I just won't have it. I won't have it. I will not. That's my English. Sorry. So when and I've been invited to play games, and I've been invited to... There's a game that I stream at the moment, which the DM Michelle said, go find 3 or 4 of your buddies and I'll DM for them. And I was like, oh, great, that's fantastic. The result is that I've asked 3 white guys and a white woman to play with me, because those are the people that I want to play with. I The nice thing, and the thing that I'm experiencing on Twitter now that I'm seeing, is that there is sort of a, I don't want to say movement, but like a movement in which people are starting to notice that a lot of the major streaming platforms, yeah, we'll go with that. A lot of those are primarily Caucasian, white, and they're very pale, or very pale. And where am I going with this? That would help, wouldn't it? They're also very male. And so the stories that are coming out seem restricted in that way to what has come before. When your daughter grows up, I'm expecting that that's going to have shifted quite a bit. I wouldn't expect 50-50 by that point, but I would expect that at least, 25% of games will actually be a lot more diverse. And that's the thing, I guess. One of the things that seems to get touted a lot is the idea of diversity. And people seem to attribute that to race. And I kind of go, don't. Because diversity means people with disabilities. Diversity means people with differing sexualities and differing genders and differing, like, there's so many different ways to be diverse, that on which is why I brought up the issue of tokenism with you, is because, like, 1 of 4 of us right now is a person of color, but 2 of 4 of us are female. And in the broader Durespit family, it's surprisingly diverse when you really look at it. It just doesn't seem that way to people that are watching. And I think that that's something that we need to be aware of. I'm sure I didn't end up where I planned on ending up, but that's where I am now.
That's okay. I mean, it's a free form discussion, right? We don't come in with show notes. We just sit down and we have a conversation as friends. So it's something that I had never thought about when you mentioned it this afternoon. Let's change gears though, because I think diversity is a topic in and of itself that we can literally fill an hour with. Let's talk about the financial barrier to entry, because there is one. Um, I know when I have brought people in, when Matt joined my group, you were involved in the group where I gave you dice, right? Did that happen, or am I wrong?
That happened.
Okay, so at the time I was giving out dice. I tried to convince my wife to let me also, because at the time Savage Worlds, which is what I run, I will play any system. I will only run Savage Worlds. At the time, Savage Worlds was in its Savage Worlds Deluxe edition. Core book was $10. So there was a time period where I tried to convince my wife to let me give out a core book to new players. It didn't last very long. But I did give out dice for a long time. I haven't brought anybody into game locally in a while, so I haven't done that. But talk to me, to those, I mean, Shauntelle, you have a million systems and a million books on your shelves. That's expensive. I looked through my drive-through RPG the other day, and my wife's in stream, so we won't say exactly how much is in there. But I promise I bought all of it in bundles. All of it. It was all vastly discounted. But there is a financial barrier. This is not a cheap hobby unless you pick one game, you play Theater of the Mind, and you never buy anything beyond your first set of dice. So how has everybody, I know Sarah and Matt both at Gen Con, you guys bought nice dice that are metal and machined and stuff like that. They hit your pocketbook hard. So when you've talked to people about game, has that ever come up as an issue that it's an expensive hobby?
I'll go ahead and take a bit of a crack at this one. I was fortunate, right, to receive a pair of dice from you or a set of dice from you. And that little token of something made me feel like I was part of the tribe, and that was really good. But I remember when we learned that those dice didn't roll well, I went and I bought my own set of Chess X dice, and that moment of purchasing something meant that the hobby was now mine. And so I always kept a little bit of a mental tally of what I was spending, but I would think to myself, if once I complete this campaign, I'll know that I'm deep enough into the hobby that it justifies me getting a mini for the next character that I create. Or, if we're all going to this convention, then yes, I'll go. I'm only going to buy one thing, and it's going to be my nice dice. And so that was my one expense. I think some of it comes back to my earlier comment about there is some sacrifice. But if you consider the hours of enjoyment you get out of tabletop RPG, it can be kept pretty reasonable. Like on a per hour basis, I get so much for my dollar.
For sure. Sarah, let's talk to you. I know, because I've played video games with your husband, I know when Jeff throws money around on things like race changes and name changes and stuff like that in World of Warcraft. What's the difference between that and tabletop? Like in terms of like financial impact for you mentally, like was the financial impact of like, hey, buy a book, hey, buy dice, hey, Erik is pushing this Kickstarter down our throats because he's obnoxious. Like, was that something that you balked at? Was that something that caused issues for you, or was it just a thing?
Well, for the first 2 years of us playing, we used some cheap plastic dice we got online. So we bought the cheap dice and we used those for a while, or we used a dice roller on our iPads. And then once we decided that our group was playing Savage World, so there was that $10 for the book, we didn't switch systems, so we didn't buy any other books, and you would let us look at the companion. Like if we were playing Supers, you let us look at the Supers book, and if we were playing the fantasy companion book, you let us look at that, so we didn't have to buy those. So yeah, for the first 2 years that we played, it wasn't a huge money investment for us because we had our cheap dice and we had our $10 book, And if it had been, if you'd say, okay, this week we're changing to this game system and you need to buy this book, and this week we're going to go and you need to buy, if it had been like that, then yeah, that would have been really hard. And I'm not sure we would still be playing at this point.
I don't think I would have friends playing if that was how I was rolling. You know, that's I have played in the group with people who've been like that. Who it's, you know, every campaign was a new game and everybody needed to have a player's handbook, and you know, everybody needed to do that. And even playing D&D, right? You know, the mentality of everyone needs to have a player's handbook at the table. A player's handbook's what, $40? Like $30-40? You need one. You really need one. Sorry, Wizards of the Coast. You probably won't sponsor me now. That's fine. But you only need one at the table. That's just how it is. Savage Worlds, it's $10, and so having more isn't hard and it's not as expensive, but you still really only need one. You play a lot more systems than anybody else at this table, Shauntelle. You've bought a lot more systems. Yep, even more systems than me. I know that you're, you know, you don't have kids, you know, those kind of things, but like, it's still a financial investment. Like, was there a point where that was a problem, or was it just something that you did? Because I've talked with friends lately who, you know, buying dice, buying a rule book, those kind of things is a barrier. It's never as much of a barrier as the time investment, which I think we'll cover next. But financially speaking, you do tend to come in and say, hey, you got to have a pair of dice, you got to have a set of dice. I also know that you're a goblin and you own 9 million dice. So, like, of the people sitting at the table who've thrown money at the hobby, I think you're definitely, you know, sitting on the biggest hoard. So talk to me a little bit about how has that been? Has that ever been something that you had a problem with? Have you known people that it has been a problem for?
When I first started playing, I was and still am just, you know, I had a proper job last year. I'm a student, so um, I'm a student, but I'm also a student that really has no other social life. So it's not like I go out and spend money on anything else. So I'm kind of, this is my thing, where other people might have makeup or going clubbing or going drinking or any number of other things. I have my dice. Um, so many dice. Um, so in terms of the financial barrier to entry, yes, it is one, and it's a big one. And my belief is, and always will be, I think, that the source book, the main source book of any game, should be for the person running the game. There can be pretty pictures in it, and I will admit to having bought a few source books purely because I've seen the art style and I love the art, and the art itself gives me a story. But the idea is that the GM, the DM, the storyteller, whoever's running the game needs that book. Nobody else should need it. I mean, for things like D&D, maybe a small like handbook with spells in it for, you know, if you've got that kind of game. But generally speaking, you shouldn't need it. You should be able to tell a good story without needing anything else other than maybe a set of dice. And you can buy dice for like $10. I mean, they're not my dice, but you can.
They're not good. They're just not.
I mean,
They won't roll well.
they won't. But you'll
I was
have
like,
dice.
Matt can vouch.
It's true.
Even then you can use a dice roller on Google. Like, they exist. It's not, and it shouldn't be the case that you should have to pay a lot of money for a hobby. And that's a concern, that that's how they're trying to market and sell them their things.
Yeah. Well, especially a hobby that's imagination based, right? Like, when I buy a setting, the last time I did it, when I bought Savage Worlds, right? Admittedly, I was gonna, with the new Savage Worlds Kickstarter, I was going in at the collector level. That was what I was doing because I wanted the leatherbound book. I wanted all of that. So I did the work to make that a thing and have that money. But the other thing I made that I make sure that there is a PDF, because I've spent the money. I'm 9 times out of 10 the GM, right? So I need the book that I might read at some point, maybe. But I can share that PDF with people. And then if they want to look up things to do character builds, or they want to look up lore information, if it's a book with lore heavy stuff or whatever, they have access to that PDF that I own, that I'm sharing the same way I'd pass around a book at the table. It's not something I don't let people go print it. I don't let those kind of things, there are certain copyright laws in place that I am strict about with my players, but I let people look at it the same way I'd let them look at the table. And to me, that reduces the financial barrier to entry a little bit. Sarah and Matt know I'm not a big fan of dice rollers personally, but too many of them are bad as a thing. But they are not necessarily as bad $10 dice. So, you got to find a middle ground there. Let's look at chat for a minute, and let's talk about, and then we'll jump back to a question that we're getting in chat. But let's talk about Frito's comment. Frito is a friend of mine in real life. We've known each other a long time, and I have tried several times to get Frito to come play. Finally, I'm getting the opportunity to get Frito to come play, and he says in chat that there is a concern about needing to know everything before being able to play. So I'm going to field that one first, and we'll jump around to the other three, because I'm primarily a GM. I have bad news for you. I've never read the rulebook cover to cover of any book except 2nd edition D&D. And I was 10. I just don't. I learn enough to run the game, and if there's a rules question, we'll look. All you've got to do is come to the table, in my opinion, willing to learn, willing to adapt, willing to have fun, and willing to understand that if you have a good GM and you have a good group of people at the table, they're not going to jump on your head about getting a rule wrong. I get rules wrong all the time. Matt has been playing for 3 years. Matt doesn't know the rules. Like, let's be totally honest. Matt can vouch. He doesn't know the rules. Sarah probably knows the Savage Worlds rules better than anyone in this call right now, because Sarah gets really invested in them. So, speaking as someone who's going to jam for you, Frito, you don't need to. All you've got to do is be willing to play, and I think we can all confirm that should be the stance at the table. As long as you're willing to play and you're willing to try and learn. Does anybody disagree with that or have something specific that they want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about rules. I I feel like it's my responsibility as a player to be familiar with general rules, and then if I'm in gray area, I'll say, hey, I think it's in keeping with the rules for me to do this, and I explain it, and then the GM is the sheriff and can tell me if I'm totally off my rocker. Um, uh, Another thing, kind of as we were talking about the financial investment and that being a barrier to entry, I've always seen the right time to buy something as the time that you can adequately appreciate the added quality or performance, whatever. And in the early stages, when I honestly didn't know if I was supposed to be rolling my wild die or not, my Chessex dice were enough because roll good, roll bad. I was just kind of learning. And so that's my perspective. I know the general rules, and I know when to, seek the guardrails of the GM as a sheriff to just kind of keep me in bounds.
What about you, Sarah? You've played Savage Worlds per Erik. for a long time now, because we're all aware that I haven't read the rules beyond the basic skimming. Does it get in the way? Is it a problem? Is it a barrier for you to have fun when, if we have to look something up every once in a while, or if we hand wave something? Is that a problem for you?
Nope. It's totally not a problem. In fact, when we first decided to start playing Savage Worlds, I am the kind of person that likes to read through. Maybe I didn't read the whole book, but I read almost the whole book. And I can say, if you think before your first game that you are just going to go and learn all the rules and read the whole book, well, maybe you're smarter than I am, but a lot of the rules didn't make any sense. And when we started playing, I couldn't remember most of them anyway. And then as we started playing, some of the basic rules that you use all the time started making more sense as you played. And then the more certain rules come up, the more you remember the ones you need. And then if they don't come up that often, it's not a big deal to look them up. So, and I don't know, I personally like playing with new people and watching them learn the game and watching them figure out what they can do and what they can't do. And sometimes they think of doing things I've never thought of before. And I like playing with people that are new to the game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Bringing somebody new in, it's like playing with a kid, right? And not necessarily in like that childish mentality, but you, they don't know necessarily. There's no right and wrong, and there isn't a right and wrong to playing RPGs. There's just not. Anybody who comes and tells you, well, you're playing wrong, is a jerk and you shouldn't listen to them. They're a barrier to entry, right? They are gatekeeping hard if they're telling you you're playing wrong. Because Sarah watches Wild Cards, I watch Wild Cards. They play differently. We watched Deadwood with Critical Role. From a rules perspective, they played Savage Worlds incorrectly, rules as written wise. But they had a good time, and their game moved along, and it didn't impact me. I admit I got annoyed in the moment, but I was the jerk in that moment, and I was gatekeeping Critical Role against my Savage Worlds. That was not acceptable of me. As long as they had fun, it doesn't matter. And so when we do dramatic tasks, we don't do dramatic tasks as written. We do dramatic tasks in the way that works best for our group and is more fun. When we do combat a little bit differently. I am a firm believer in the concept of, you pitch something to me and I'll look at you and be like, I'll give you a Benny if you do it, which is not necessarily in keeping with the rules, right? Like, I shouldn't be baiting you into doing something, especially if I know what the consequences are, but because I know what the consequences are, that's what's fun. So talking a little bit about what my wife says in chat, as we move into kind of closing, and we'll try and get Sarah out of here on time. I had a buddy named Kevin. Go follow him at Melvin Smith on Twitter. He's a great guy, and he taught me to play Savage Worlds. I'd heard Savage Worlds on the Gamers Table podcast, and at the time, I was looking to build a group. Speaking of my own barriers of entry, one of the things was finding a group. I've always had that problem. I was really good at getting people to come play. I was really hard at getting people to stay as a group, because it was always like, oh, I've got to drive an hour, and that's a long way to drive. I found somebody local. Thanks so much for teaching me about this game, but I found people who were closer to me, so I would lose my group. But D&D was always clunky for me. It's still clunky to me. It's why I don't play. Combat takes a really long time. I listened to a Gamers Table podcast. They did an actual play. We're aboard a ship, had a whole bunch of pirates who swept in onto the ship. It's like 25, 30 pirates, 4 PCs, 12-minute combat. And I was like, this is the game. I'm never playing anything else. That was what made that decision. Barrier to entry then was finding people to play it with me. And finding people who were willing to give it a try. Because Savage Worlds is more of a household name, but at that time, if you say to somebody, hey, I'm going to play a tabletop RPG, if they're not in the know, For a long time, they'd be like, what? But if you said, I'm going to D&D tonight, I still have people that I say that to, and I don't play D&D. But it's easier to say to somebody, yeah, I play D&D tonight, even though I'm playing Savage Worlds. I've known people who do that with Vampire. I know people who do that with Traveler. I know people who do that with whatever. It's just easier to say D&D. The only people who don't seem to do that is Pathfinder people, but I think that's a different conversation. But when we started playing, my buddy Kevin invited us to play in a one-shot, and it's super simple. I've played it with Sarah. I have adapted it with Sarah. I think Matt's played it before, but the whole idea was your toad people, your bullywugs, in a swamp. Your swamp's drying up because the humans built the dam and you need to go deal with it. The story is not complicated, and it is very much a railroady adventure that focuses around wildcard combat in the swamp with a wildcard giant crocodile, extras combat at the dam, possibly dramatic tasks to bring the dam down. You literally nail all 3 of the primary mechanics of Savage Worlds. You do it in 3 hours, and it moves quick. And to me, and I think we can talk with Shawnee here for a second, your first Savage Worlds game was League of Extraordinary Gentlefolk, right? Super railroady one-shot. But it was simple, and I think you walked out of there pretty much understanding how to play. But you didn't know anything about it when you sat down.
Nope.
How much did that get in your way of having fun?
Never. But that's kind of my view on that is if you don't know how to play a game, it's okay not to know how to play a game. You just basically say, I want to do this. And then it's up to the GM to tell you how to do that or how to achieve that in the mechanics you've got.
And I would argue, and I think Matt and Sarah will agree that this is how we do things, in my groups at least, that's the GM's job. You know, your job is to tell the story. Your job as players is to tell me the cool crap you want to do. My job is to want you to succeed at doing cool crap. If your GM doesn't want you to succeed, in my opinion, sorry to the other GMs out there, you're doing it wrong. Want your players to succeed. You're there to collaboratively tell a story. But say, this is what I want to do. Matt did it in our very first game, and I'm going to tell a Matt story. We've reached that point of the evening where Erik just talks a lot, so I'm sorry. I know that they're way more interesting than me. But I remember being in a game, and Matt was like, I want to leap out across this pit, grab onto this massive tentacle, slash this massive tentacle, and throw myself back onto the thing. In D&D, you're not doing that, number one. But in Savage Worlds, you are. There's just multi-action penalties. But we always operated on the mantra. Sarah can, I think, nod her head and vouch that it's, tell me what you want to do, I'll tell you what dice we're rolling, and then we'll see how they fall. That's how a game should run. It doesn't matter if you know all the rules. It doesn't matter if the GM knows all the rules. As long as between all of you can come up with a smooth way to make the mechanic happen. Tabletop RPGs, and the reason why they focus so heavily on due respite, are a storytelling medium. To me, before they're a game, before they're anything else, they're a storytelling medium. They're collaborative. They have a randomness in them with the dice, and they are incredibly, incredibly dynamic. And that's what makes them fun to me. It's why I will always sit down and play a tabletop RPG over most anything else. My wife brings home a lot of games. She loves board games, and I have nothing against board games generally, but she'll bring home a lot of board games and be like, you'll love it. It's like tabletop role-playing light. And then in my head, I'm like, yeah, but we could add like half a step and we'd just be at tabletop role-playing normal. And that's just me. That's how I am. But that's how a game should run at your table for a tabletop RPG. Is just collaborate, talk it through, make it happen, want each other to succeed. And then you don't have those barriers to entry. Board games are fine. I don't have anything against them. Please don't eviscerate me on Twitter or when I come to bed later, because board games are fine. Matt doesn't like them. Eviscerate Matt, not me.
Wait, what?
Matt's anti-board games. We've covered that last episode. We became friends over Matt hating a board game.
I think there might someday be a board game that I like. So Shauntelle B, if you have recommendations, I'll take them. But I haven't found one I like yet.
And I've tried. He didn't even like King of Tokyo. Anyway, do you have any closing thoughts? We'll go around the circle the opposite way. Sarah, do you have any closing thoughts on barriers to entry? Do you have any advice? Because I like to end the show as though we're a Jerry Springer episode and Jerry is giving advice, preferably without the fighting. Please don't beat each other up across the internet. That would be awkward. Do you have any closing thoughts? Any advice you have for new players out there like Frito, or any advice to people who maybe are experiencing hiccups or rocky roads in their current games?
Oh goodness. Just give it a try. You don't have to have the fancy dice. Hopefully your GM doesn't make you buy all the books. Try to find a good group and then it'll be lots of fun.
What about you, Matt? Any closing thoughts on barriers to entry, advice for new people?
Yeah, keep it simple, keep it light, be patient with yourself, and jump in with both feet. You will love it once you make that little bit of investment of time and emotion.
Shawnee B?
There may not be anyone that looks like you playing the game right now, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be. Maybe you should give it a try and see how that goes, because it's kind of fun on this.
And for me, I feel like I'm just talking to Frito, which is the intention, but come in, let your barrier to entry be finding someone to play with, and then once they've invited you, just trust them. Because if they've invited you, they want you to play, they want you to have fun, and they want you to be there. And if they're worth their salt and if they're worth the time investment, they're going to be patient with you, they're going to teach you, and they're going to have fun with you and give you the same thing that you they're going to give you back everything that you put into it. I believe that tabletop role-playing games are for everyone. I believe that they have a point in everyone's lives. Not everyone necessarily enjoys them as much as the next person, but there are reasons for that, and that's okay. But I do think that everybody can find something that they enjoy. I have a friend who plays, and the only tabletop RPG he plays is one where he plays a baseball franchise manager, and like the mechanics are all about essentially simulating a fantasy baseball league, but he also role plays around being the GM. And that's cool for him. I admit, to me, that's not my cup of tea, but it gets him into a role-playing space, and that's cool. Matt is a LARPer. I'm not. Shauntelle is an actress. I am not. I'm like Sarah. We sit behind a screen, we roll some dice, we have a good time. But it's out there for everybody. Your barrier to entry is finding a group of people to play with, and a lot of the time, all it takes is asking, because a lot more of your friends play than you know. Next week we will be back. However, next week we're back on Monday. We are going to be on Monday from here on out. Monday night, same time, 9 p.m. Mountain, Tuesday at like that's 3 p.m. Australia time.
Yep.
But Monday nights, 9 p.m. Mountain, that'll be our time going forward. And it'll be these same 4 people coming at you with a new topic. Watch our Twitter, and the topic will go up as a question of the day, so that you can be ready, and it'll be up on Monday morning. So you can think about it and come in with any questions that you have. We really appreciate you being here. We really appreciate the support that you have shown Do Respite. Our website is now up at dorespite.com. You can find archives for our shows. You can find links to all of our social media and any of the financial supporting tools that you feel inclined to look at are also there. The biggest way you can support, though, is share with a friend and let them know that we're here, because the same way tabletop RPGs are for everyone, stories are for everyone, and we'd love to share them. So for me, for Shawnee, for Matt, and for Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you Monday. Have a good night.